1 o'clock hour, we're going to switch gears now. We're going to talk about Michigan basketball, Michigan State basketball. They played for the only time over the weekend. And so in order to kick this conversation off correctly, I have to bring in Drew Hallett, who writes for, I said it, misspoke earlier, he writes for Maize and Brew.
Oh,
the
not
other
MGO blog.
Not
okay.
MGO blog. Maize and Brew. I believe that is I don't know. Let's get him on the line and talk to him right now. Hopefully this doesn't blow my ear up.
I hope not, too.
All right. Drew, my friend, how are you?
Doing well. How about you?
I'm doing pretty well. Everyone here and everything good and stuff like that? Okay.
Yes.
All right. Perfect. Hey, man, so obviously Saturday's game probably not exactly what the Wolverines were hoping for.
I think that's pretty safe to say. No, yeah, that probably went about as poorly as you could possibly imagine.
Yeah, the weekend as a whole for Michigan, too. I mean, Friday night you had the hockey game down at the Joe. Michigan State gets away with that one. Saturday the game, definitely the final score was not indicative of how much Michigan State is ahead of Michigan at the curve right now. When you break this game down and when you write about this game, what's the first thing that you wrote about?
Well, I'm in the process of writing it right now, actually. I didn't have a chance to write it over the weekend just because of the Super Bowl on Sunday.
Mm-hmm.
But the first thing that comes to mind is just, I mean, at this point, there's not even so much to break down from the game. It's just looking at what a missed opportunity this was for Michigan this past week. Heading into this week, they had a very shiny record, a very good record. They were 17-5, 7-2 in the Big Ten. But there still were a lot of questions about Michigan. They got a lot of wins against, kind of a soft schedule. And, they did have the Maryland win earlier on, which was good. But, they, had struggled against top 25 teams. You go back to the, Xavier loss or the SMU loss or the Purdue loss. And, a lot of those losses were, all those losses were by double digits. So there was a lot of questions about whether this Michigan team could, really compete with the top 25 and, really cement its status as a surefire NCAA tournament team. Because heading into this week, they were about a number 7 seed, and this was a good opportunity for them to get a quality win, to show that, this team is a good team and can be in the NCAA tournament. And this was an excellent opportunity because not only are they playing Indiana and Michigan State, they're getting both at home. And good teams win home games against other good teams. I mean, that's what you have to do. And to not only lose both of those games, but to not even be competitive in both of them, it's very discouraging for Michigan. And it's a big-time opportunity wasted because, obviously Michigan fans weren't happy with the results this past week. But, this Michigan team still is, right now, I think I've been looking at the different, bracketology roundups, and they seem to be around a bubble team right now.
Mm-hmm.
But the schedule's not going to get any easier. I mean, yes, they play at Minnesota this week coming up on Wednesday, but Minnesota hasn't won in the Big Ten, but road games are never easy.
Right.
But then you have, home game against Purdue, at Ohio State, at Maryland, and then you close out the season at Wisconsin and home against Iowa. Those aren't easy games. Are going to, and Michigan needs to add a couple more wins, to their resume if they want to be a tournament team. So they let a really good opportunity go to waste, and now it's going to be a lot tougher for them to make the NCAA tournament.
Drew Hallett on the line with us from Maize and Brew, a great blog that you guys can check out. Michigan fans, of course, no strangers to visiting that website. But when I talked to Beeline this morning for our weekly one-on-one chat, I asked him, I said, look, your losses, they're not really that bad. And he said, no, they're not. And he thinks that Maryland and Texas will be top 40 RPI wins for them, top 50. He goes, we need a couple more of them. So on the flip side, while the schedule isn't an easy schedule, he said, that's not necessarily a bad thing because we know what we need to get. Think about if Michigan's in this situation where they have no quality games left. And then all of a sudden you're looking at this and how are we going to get in? We're just going to stockpile wins against bad teams. That's not really a recipe for success in the NCAA tournament. And Beeline even admitted today that starting now, every game's a tournament team or tournament game for his team. That can obviously help them as March Madness approaches.
Oh, and I totally agree with John Beeline on that. The difference, though, is it's not like Michigan just lost, to Indiana and Michigan State by, 1 or 2 points. So these were, close games. These were blowouts at home, not on the road, at home. And, you look at the Indiana game, the Hoosiers were up by as many as 27 in the second half before Michigan's reserves cut that down to 13 to make it look a lot better than it actually was. And then the Michigan State game, the Spartans were up by 30 with just under 3 minutes left. And it only, once again, it took, the reserves to come on and to really cut into that lead and make it look a 16-point deficit. But, I mean, it wasn't like Michigan was in this game and just lost these close games. That would be disappointing, but you would still think, okay, the Michigan's, they're still a competitive team. They're a good team. They're still in good shape to, get some of these quality wins. The problem was that they got blown out, and it wasn't close at all. And that's not a good sign for a Michigan team that was at home when they now have to go and play these, difficult games against these quality teams, whether it be at home or on the road. And so the confidence that Michigan can go in there and win those games is definitely much lower now than it was before this week. And I think that's where the concern is. But I do agree that, every game at this point is pretty much a tournament. It's like a tournament game. Michigan's now in a position where it really needs to start winning and getting these quality wins. And they have to show that this last week was just, you got to just, try to learn from it, throw it aside, and hopefully bounce back. Every team has, weeks during the season where they don't perform as well. You look at Michigan State just a couple weeks ago. They had their 3-game losing streak. Losing to Nebraska at home, which was really a surprise to many people. And then they've come back and won 4 straight and looked really good doing it. So, Michigan just has to hope and improve from this, learn from this, and hope that this was just one of those downer weeks that it has, and that it has to bounce back and get ready, because it's not going to get any easier, and they're going to need those wins.
Drew, I gotta ask you a very pointed, very pointed question here. Does anyone, Michigan fan, even care? I mean, obviously, Jim Harbaugh, they won the day with the recruiting thing. He's been in the news for so much, overshadowing anything else that really goes on at the university athletically, because football is the machine that it is in all universities across the board. But I see this, like, I was at the game on Saturday, I didn't feel like the fans cared that much that they were losing. Do you feel that sense? Do you hear, what do people, when they email you and when you get in conversations on Twitter, you have your diehards, of course, for basketball, but what's the general sense as Michigan basketball kind of hovers right here?
I don't know if I would say that they don't care as much as I would say that Michigan basketball fans, except for the diehards, they can be very fickle. Okay. I feel like whereas, Michigan fans are obviously, they're with the football team, they root for the football team, whether they're good or bad, they're always, very emotionally invested. I feel like they're not as emotionally invested when it comes to the basketball team. They obviously cared a great deal when Trey Burke was on campus and Nick Stauskas was on campus in Michigan, those from 2012 to 2014. They won 2 Big Ten championships and went to, back-to-back Elite Eights, went to the national championship game. They obviously cared a great deal then. But I feel like when it comes to basketball, when things aren't going as well, they're not as likely to stick around or, be as interested in what's happening. And I felt like with this past week, and I know you mentioned you were at the Michigan State game this week, but I definitely feel like the combination of Michigan losing to Indiana at home the way it did, with the National Signing Day, with Michigan having the signing of the stars and landing at, a top 5 recruiting class and getting Rashawn Gary, the #1 recruit in the country, there was so much excitement about that Michigan fans were focusing, investing themselves in that news as opposed to, focusing on the bad with the basketball team, and knowing that Michigan State was going to come in and probably was a bad matchup for Michigan, and we're concerned about what was going to happen. So I will say, though, that I do think Michigan basketball fans, except for the diehards, I'm not going to say it's all of them, but I do think just from a general standpoint, they can be fickle in terms of rooting for this team, especially when things get, they don't go as well.
Yeah, I agree with that, because the atmosphere in there is always interesting, because they're all hyped up at the beginning of the game, and then Michigan State gets out to a hot start, and I know that you're down by 20 at home. That's not going to make a lot of people really cheer for you, but I don't know. It just seems that the passion for the basketball team right now is fickle. It could go either way. Because look what Michigan State did last year, and I hate to use them as a counterpoint, but look at what UConn did a couple of years ago. They kind of just eked into the tournament as a 9-10 seed. It's possible to do it, and with the way Michigan plays, shooting the ball from outside, they just have to find defensive toughness. And they could put it together here in the last few weeks of the season. What's your prognostication, I guess, if you had to think Michigan was going to get in, and if they do, where do you think they are seated, or if they make the tournament at all?
It's so hard to tell right now, because the giant cloud hanging over Michigan right now is, when is Karis LeVert going to return? Really soon, according to John this morning. He told me very, very soon.
So I would maybe not Wednesday, but definitely I think that if he's that close, Purdue this Saturday would be the homecoming.
Okay, because I feel like that is such an important part, and Karis LeVert is obviously a tremendous player. He's averaging 17, 5, and 5 right now, or he was before his injury, and not only was he putting up really good per game averages, he was one of the most efficient offensive players in the game. Obviously, he hasn't played against some of the Big Ten competition because he's been out, but I believe his offensive rating is I think 129.1, is about the second best in the country among players with a 24% usage rate. So in terms of go-to offensive players, he's been one of the most efficient players in the game. And to not have that kind of, all-American type player on your team is a huge loss. And sometimes I think that gets forgotten when you're discussing Michigan and what they're capable of. But the longer and longer, he's been out, it's been harder to really prognosticate in terms of how Michigan's going to do. But if he comes back, I think that's going to really help their offense because, obviously the defense is a huge problem. And anyone that's watched the last two games has seen that, as Indiana and the Spartans just eviscerated their defense.
Yeah.
But even the offense is having issues, shooting. I mean, part of it, I think, is fatigue. With Karis LeVert out, they've only been able to really play 5 players at, for the spots 1 through 4, especially with their wings, because they haven't really had the depth at wing that they thought they were going to have. Cam Chapman hasn't developed like they anticipated. They've tried DJ Wilson as a 4, but that isn't really working out.
Right.
So, they're pretty much playing just 4 guys, and so when you have that kind of fatigue with those guys playing the minutes that they have, but then you also have the fact that LeVert is such a good player in terms of penetrating into the paint and getting easier looks and forcing the defense to collapse on itself, that it allows, the shooters to get open on the perimeter for threes. That hasn't happened as much, especially against Indiana and Michigan State, who have more athletic, longer defenses. And when, Zach Irvin's really kind of the only player that can get into the paint and doesn't do it nearly as well as LeVert, that becomes a problem for the offense. They start, having stagnant movement on offense. They're jacking up shots on the perimeter. And it becomes a big problem, and that's why their offense has struggled as much as it has. But all in all, if LeVert comes back and he's healthy and he's able to contribute, I still think this team can make the NCAA tournament. Obviously, right now it seems like they're going to be more of a bubble team than anything else. So if they do make it, it would probably be around maybe a 10 or 11 seed. But I do think this team can make the tournament. And like you said, this is not like a year where there's a bunch of elite teams that stand out from the rest. There's a lot of parity in college basketball this year, and so if they make the team, or they make the tournament, who knows? If they get together at the right time with the right rhythm, maybe they make a little bit of a run. But right now, it's looking no better than a bubble team, the number 10 seed is what I'm thinking.
Drew C. Hallett is the Twitter handle. You can follow him on that wonderful service of 160 characters or less. Drew, thanks so much. You can also read him at maizeandbrew.com. That is a fantastic blog. We're going to have you back on again for sure, because you're a wealth of knowledge when it comes to Michigan basketball, my friend. Enjoy yourself out there in the sunny West Coast.
I will do. Thank you very much for having me on, Justin.
All right, have a good one, my friend.